This video is made for entertainment purposes only. I made a deal with a Sasquatch once. Not the kind of deal you make with a handshake or a signed contract. The kind you make with stolen cannabis, unspoken respect, and the understanding that some secrets are worth more than your freedom. My name is Marcus Webb, and for 3 years, I ran an illegal grow operation deep in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest in Washington state. This was 2009, back when even medical marijuana was fighting for legitimacy, and recreational use was still a pipe dream. I wasn't some cartel operator or criminal mastermind. I was a broke Iraq War veteran with a bad back, worse nightmares, and a mortgage I couldn't pay after the economy collapsed. So I did what desperate men do. I found a remote valley, learned everything I could about guerrilla growing, and planted 60 cannabis plants in a clearing where the sun hit just right and the nearest hiking trail was 5 miles away. What I didn't know was that I wasn't alone out there. And what I definitely didn't know was that my invisible partner would one day save my life, and maybe teach me more about honor than any military manual ever did. June 2009. The first season, I was paranoid about everything. Every snapped branch was a park ranger. Every distant voice was the DEA closing in. I'd hike in before dawn with a 40-pound pack of nutrients and water jugs, tend my plants in silence, and hike out by sunset. I never stayed overnight. Never lit a fire. Never left trash. My biggest fear wasn't law enforcement, though. It was wildlife. Black bears could destroy a crop in an afternoon. Deer would browse the tender leaves like it was an all-you-can-eat buffet. Even elk had been known to trample through grow sites, oblivious to the tens of thousands of dollars in plants they were crushing underfoot. So I came prepared. I strung fishing line around the perimeter with bells attached. I sprinkled coyote urine granules to keep deer away. I even hung bags of human hair from branches, an old trick I'd read about online. Deer supposedly hate the smell of humans. But by mid-July, I realized something strange. Nothing was touching my plants. Not one nibble. Not one broken stem. The fishing line never tripped. The bells never rang. I'd find fresh deer tracks ending abruptly 20 feet from the clearing, as if the animals had hit an invisible fence and turned around. At first, I thought I'd just gotten lucky. Maybe the coyote urine was working better than expected. Maybe the deer population was low that year. But then I started noticing other things. Footprints. Huge ones. Not bear tracks. I knew what those looked like. These were elongated, almost human-shaped, but easily twice the size of my boot. 16, maybe 17 inches long. 5 distinct toes. Deep impressions in the soft earth near the creek that ran along the edge of my grow site. I told myself it was a hoax. Some hiker messing around with fake feet. But the prints appeared in places no hiker would go. Deep in the brush, far from any trail, in mud so fresh it couldn't have been there more than a few hours. And then there was the smell. Once, in late August, I arrived at dawn to find the air thick with a scent I can only describe as wrong. It was musky, pungent, almost sulphurous, like wet dog mixed with rotting compost and something sharply animal. It clung to the back of my throat and made my eyes water. The smell was strongest near a massive Douglas fir at the edge of the clearing. When I approached, I found deep claw marks gouged into the bark, 8 feet off the ground. Fresh sap was still oozing from the wounds. No bear could reach that high. No bear I'd ever heard of, anyway. I stood there, staring at those claw marks, and for the first time, I felt it. I was being watched. August 2009. The first offering. I'm not a superstitious man. 3 tours in Iraq beat that out of me. But I'm also not stupid. Whatever was out there, bear, Bigfoot, or something I didn't have a name for, it was keeping the wildlife away from my crop. And that was saving me thousands of dollars in lost yield. So I decided to do something that felt insane even as I was doing it. I left an offering. I took one of my healthiest plants, a beautiful indica with dense, resinous buds just starting to purple, and carefully harvested about a 1/4 pound. I dried it quickly over a week using a makeshift setup in my garage, then sealed it in a waterproof bag. The next time I hiked in, I left the bag at the base of that Douglas fir with the claw marks. I didn't leave a note. Didn't say anything out loud. Just set it down, stepped back, and returned to my plants. When I came back 4 days later, the bag was gone. September 2009. The understanding. The disappearance of that first bag could have been anything. A curious bear. A hiker. Hell, maybe I'd left it somewhere else and forgotten. But I decided to test it. I left another bag. Same spot. This time, I marked the tree with a small cairn of stones so I'd know for sure I had the right place. 3 days later, gone. I left a third bag 2 weeks after that. Gone in 2 days. By the time October rolled around and I was preparing for harvest, I'd left 5 bags total. Every single one disappeared. And every single time, my plants remained untouched by animals. More than that, they thrived. I started noticing small things. Branches that had been gently bent away from each other to allow more sunlight through. Rocks that seemed to have been moved to improve water drainage around the root zones. Once, I found a dead raccoon placed carefully at the edge of the clearing, as if left there deliberately, a warning to other scavengers, maybe. I never saw who, or what, was doing it. But I knew. And I think it knew that I knew. We had an arrangement. An understanding. I would leave tribute, and whatever lived in these woods would protect my crop. No words. No contract. Just an unspoken deal between two beings who both had something to lose. It should have felt crazy. It should have terrified me. Instead, it felt like the most honest relationship I'd had in years. Harvest season is the most dangerous time for an illegal grower. Your plants are at peak value, which means your risk is at peak level. Other growers might try to rip you off. Law enforcement steps up patrols. And you're moving large amounts of product out of the woods, which means more trips, more exposure, more chances to get caught. I planned everything meticulously. I'd harvest at night over 3 trips, using a headlamp with a red filter to preserve my night vision. I'd pack the trimmed buds into sealed bags, cache them in different locations, then extract them 1 backpack at a time over the course of a week. But on the second night, something happened that changed everything. I was halfway through trimming the last section of plants when I heard it. A low, rumbling vocalization. Not quite a growl. Not quite a hum. Something in between, deep and resonant, like a cello played in a minor key. It came from the darkness beyond my headlamp's reach, somewhere in the thick wall of Douglas firs and western hemlocks that surrounded the clearing. I froze. The sound came again. Closer this time. My hand instinctively went to the Glock 19 I kept in a chest holster under my jacket. I didn't draw it. Not yet. But my fingers rested on the grip. "I'm not here to cause trouble," I said quietly, feeling ridiculous even as the words left my mouth. "Just finishing up. I'll be gone soon." Silence. Then, movement. Something big shifted in the shadows, a dark mass that separated itself from the deeper darkness of the forest. It didn't step into the light. It didn't need to. I could sense its size, its presence, the way you can sense a storm coming before the first drop of rain falls. My heart was hammering. Every instinct screamed at me to run. But I didn't. Instead, I slowly reached into my pack and pulled out the last bag of tribute I'd prepared, a full pound this time, the best buds from the entire crop. I held it up so it caught the dim red glow of my headlamp. "This is for you," I said. "Thank you. For everything." I set the bag down on a flat rock, then took 3 deliberate steps backward. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, the shape moved forward. And I saw it. Not clearly. Not in full detail. But enough. It was massive, 8 feet tall, maybe more. Covered in dark, shaggy hair that seemed to absorb the light. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, its arms long and powerful. And its eyes. God, its eyes. They reflected the red light of my headlamp like an animal's, but there was something human in them. Intelligence. Awareness. Something that looked back at me not as prey or predator, but as an equal. It reached down with one enormous hand and picked up the bag. The movement was deliberate, careful, almost gentle. Then it made that sound again, the low, rumbling vocalization, but different this time. Softer. Less warning, more acknowledgement. And then it was gone. I stood there in the darkness for a long time, my legs shaking, my mind racing. I'd just seen a Sasquatch, and it had just thanked me. I couldn't let it go. 4 weeks after that final harvest, I obsessed over what I'd seen. I scoured the internet for Sasquatch sightings in the Gifford Pinchot. I read every encounter report, every blurry photograph, every half-baked theory. Most of it was garbage. Hoaxes and misidentifications and people desperate for attention. But some of it rang true. There were patterns. Sightings clustered in specific valleys. Reports of gifted game left at campsites. Stories of loggers and hunters who swore they'd been watched, protected, even guided out of dangerous situations by something they couldn't explain. And then I found something that made everything click into place. A blog post from a retired forestry worker who'd spent 40 years in the Cascades. He wrote about finding Sasquatch pharmacies, places where the creatures seemed to gather specific plants. Devil's Club for its anti-inflammatory properties. Willow bark for pain relief. And cannabis. They're not recreational users, he wrote. They're treating pain. Arthritis, injuries, maybe chronic conditions we don't even have names for. I've seen it with my own eyes, an old one, gray around the muzzle, chewing cannabis leaves like medicine. They're smarter than we give them credit for. That's when I understood. The creature hadn't been stealing my tribute. It had been using it. December 2009. Most growers disappear after harvest. They take their profit, lay low through winter, and return in spring to start the cycle again. That's the smart play. The safe play. I didn't do that. Instead, I found myself hiking back into that valley every few weeks through the winter months, ostensibly to scout for the next season, but really, I was looking for them. I never saw the Sasquatch again during those winter trips. But I saw signs. Massive tracks in fresh snow, already half-filled by falling flakes but unmistakable in their shape and size. Trees with bark stripped away in precise vertical strips. Something I'd read was a territorial marker or communication method. And once, in late January, I found a deer carcass hung in a tree, field-dressed with a precision that suggested hands, not claws. But the most telling sign was at the Douglas fir where I'd been leaving tribute. Something, had left me a gift. A small pile of objects arranged carefully on the same flat rock where I'd placed my offerings. 3 perfect obsidian arrowheads, ancient by the look of them, and a cluster of what I later identified as Devil's Club roots, carefully cleaned and bundled with stripped cedar bark. I stood there in the snow, staring at those objects, and felt something crack open in my chest. This wasn't just an arrangement anymore. This was communication. Reciprocity. They were telling me they understood the value of what I'd given, and they were offering something in return. I carefully packed the gifts in my bag and left something new, a military surplus first aid kit, fully stocked. I didn't know if they could use it, but it felt right. When I returned 3 weeks later, the kit was gone. In its place, a bundle of wild ginseng roots, worth hundreds of dollars to the right buyer. We were trading. Across species. Across the boundary between the known world and the hidden one. And I was in deeper than I'd ever intended. March 2010. Spring came early that year. By mid-March, the snow had retreated to the higher elevations, and I was already preparing my site for the new season. I decided to expand, 80 plants this time, in 2 separate locations within the same valley. More risk, but also more tribute to leave, more medicine to provide. I was working on clearing brush from the second site when I heard it. That same low vocalization, but different. Urgent. Almost pleading. I turned slowly, and there it was. The same Sasquatch from Harvest. At least, I thought it was the same one. 8 feet of muscle and dark brown hair, standing at the edge of the tree line. But this time, it wasn't hiding. It was fully visible in the late afternoon light, and it was gesturing. Not random movements. Deliberate, repeated gestures. It pointed at me, then at itself, then off to the northeast, deeper into the valley. Then it repeated the sequence. Follow. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to stay put. Don't follow a massive cryptid deeper into the wilderness. Don't walk away from your gear, your GPS, your escape route. But I'd spent 3 years in Iraq reading people, learning when someone was hostile and when they were desperate. And this creature, whatever it was desperate. I took a step forward. "You want me to come with you?" It nodded. An actual, unmistakable nod. Jesus Christ. I grabbed my pack, checked that my Glock was accessible, and followed. The hidden camp. We hiked for 40 minutes, moving through terrain I'd never explored. Up a steep ridge, down into a narrow ravine, then up again to a plateau hidden behind a wall of ancient cedars. The Sasquatch moved with impossible silence for something so large, occasionally stopping to make sure I was keeping up. Then we reached the camp. I don't know what else to call it. It wasn't a structure exactly, but it was clearly a deliberate dwelling. A natural rock overhang had been enclosed with woven branches and cedar bark, creating a shelter large enough for several enormous beings. The ground was covered with layers of dry moss and fir boughs, bedding. A small stream ran nearby. Drying racks made from branches held strips of what looked like venison. And in the back of the shelter, lying on a bed of moss, was an old Sasquatch. I knew it was old immediately. Its hair was silver gray, its face lined with deep creases. It was breathing in shallow, labored gasps, and even from 15 feet away, I could see the swelling in its joints. Knuckles, knees, ankles all grotesquely enlarged. Severe arthritis. Maybe rheumatoid. The kind that makes every movement agony. My guide vocalized softly, a series of low hoots and rumbles, and the elder opened. Its eyes. They fixed on me with startling clarity. Ancient eyes. Intelligent eyes. Eyes that had seen decades of seasons in these mountains. The younger Sasquatch gestured at the elder, then at me, then made a eating motion with its hands. It took me a moment, but I understood. Medicine. The elder needs medicine. The cannabis, I said softly. You've been using it for this. For the pain. The younger one nodded again. I slowly approached the elder, moving carefully, keeping my hands visible. When I was 5 feet away, I knelt and opened my pack. I had about 2 ounces of last year's harvest with me. I'd been bringing some on every trip, just in case. I pulled it out and held it up. "This will help," I said. "I promise." The elder watched me with those ancient eyes. Then, slowly, it raised one trembling hand and reached toward me. I placed the bag in its palm. The hand closed around it with surprising gentleness, and the elder brought it close to its face, inhaling deeply. Its eyes closed, and it made a soft sound, almost a sigh. Relief, maybe. Or gratitude. The younger Sasquatch touched my shoulder. Gently. The hand was enormous, the fingers rough and calloused, but the touch was careful. Respectful. In that moment, I understood something profound. I wasn't just helping a creature. I was helping a family. A community. These beings had language, culture, relationships. The younger one was a caregiver. The elder was someone loved, someone worth protecting. They were people. Just not human people. April 2010. After that day, everything changed. I moved forward with my 80-plant operation, but now I had a partner. The younger Sasquatch, I started thinking of him as gray, because of the distinctive gray streak across his back, began actively helping. He'd move rocks to improve drainage, bend branches to optimize sunlight. Once, I arrived to find he'd redirected a small spring to flow directly through my irrigation trench. The work would have taken me hours with a shovel. He'd done it overnight with his bare hands. In return, I brought medicine. Not just cannabis, but everything I could research about natural arthritis treatment. Devil's Club, which I'd learned they already knew about. Turmeric supplements from the local health food store. MSM powder. Even CBD oil, which was just starting to become available legally. I'd leave it all at the Douglas fir, and Gray would collect it. Sometimes he left things in return, bundles of wild herbs, fresh venison, once a beautifully tanned deer hide that I still have hanging in my garage. We never spoke. He couldn't form human words, and I couldn't replicate his vocalizations. But we communicated. Simple gestures, repeated patterns, eventually a rudimentary sign language of our own invention. I learned things. There were 4 of them in the valley. Gray, the elder, I called him Silver in my head, and 2 others who stayed more distant, a smaller female and what might have been a juvenile. A family unit, maybe the last one in this part of the Cascades. They'd been here for generations. Long before the logging. Long before the park boundaries. This was their home in a way that went beyond legal ownership or human maps. And Silver was dying. Not immediately. Not dramatically. But slowly, the way old beings die when their bodies finally give out. The medicine helped. I could see the difference in his mobility, the reduction in swelling, but it was a stopgap, not a cure. Gray knew it. I knew it. And I think Silver knew it too. But the medicine bought him time. Dignity. Days without agony. That mattered. June 2010. I first noticed the SUV in early June. Black, late-model Ford Explorer, parked at a trailhead 6 miles from my grow site. Government plates. Tinted windows. Empty, but with that unmistakable look of a vehicle that would be returning soon. I'd gotten comfortable. 3 years without a close call had made me sloppy. I'd started using the same parking spot, the same trails, the same schedule. Patterns are what get you caught. I immediately changed my routine. New parking locations. Random timing. Longer, more circuitous routes in and out. But the SUV kept appearing. Different trailheads, but always somewhere along my general access routes. Someone was conducting surveillance. Then, in mid-June, I spotted the drone. I was at my primary grow site, adjusting drip lines, when I heard the distinctive whine of quadcopter motors. I looked up to see a small black drone hovering about 200 feet above the canopy, its camera gimbal pointed down. They'd found me. Or they were close enough that they were mapping the area systematically. DA. Had to be. They do aerial surveillance of national forests every summer, looking for illegal grows. Usually they use helicopters or fixed-wing aircraft, but drones were becoming more common. I had maybe a week. 2 at most before they had enough evidence for a warrant. I should have cut my losses. Abandoned the crop, destroyed anything that could link me to the site, disappeared. But I thought about Silver. About Gray. About the medicine that was keeping an ancient being comfortable in his final days. I couldn't just leave. July 2010. I made it 3 more weeks. 3 weeks of paranoia and careful planning. I reduced my visits to once every 5 days. I approached from different directions each time. I staged emergency caches with supplies, cash, and fake IDs at various points along Forest Service roads. Gray knew something was wrong. I could see it in the way he watched me, the way his body language had become tense and alert. Sasquatches, I'd learned, are incredibly perceptive. They can read humans better than we can read each other. On July 19th, I arrived at the site at dawn to find Gray waiting for me at the tree line. He was agitated, pacing, making low, urgent vocalizations. "What is it?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew. He gestured toward the east, where the main Forest Service road ran about 2 miles away. Then he held up his hands and made a walking motion with his fingers. Multiple figures. Moving toward us. Then he made the most chilling gesture. He touched his hip, miming the drawing of a weapon. Armed people. Coming here. How many? I asked. He held up both hands. All 10 fingers. Then 3 more. 13 people. That wasn't a local patrol. That was a raid. When? I asked, my mouth dry. Gray pointed at the sun, then moved his hand across the sky to a position indicating mid-morning. 2, maybe 3 hours. I should have run. Grabbed my emergency cache and disappeared into the backcountry before the raid team arrived. I could have been in Idaho within 2 days, Canada within 4. But I looked at the plants, 80 healthy cannabis plants in full flower, representing medicine that Silver desperately needed. And I thought about Gray, who'd protected these plants for a year, who'd trusted me, who'd brought me into his family's most vulnerable space. "I need to harvest what I can," I said. "The mature buds. At least enough to last." I didn't finish the sentence. Enough to last Silver through his final months. Maybe his final weeks. Gray shook his head violently. "Too dangerous. Too much time." "I have to try," I said. For a long moment, we stared at each other. Human and Sasquatch. Two beings from different worlds, connected by an impossible friendship and a dying elder who deserved better than agony. Then Gray made a decision. He vocalized, a sharp, carrying call that echoed through the valley. Within minutes, the other two Sasquatches appeared. From the forest. The female and the juvenile, both wary but responding to Gray's summons. Gray gestured rapidly, his sign language, but directed at them. I caught fragments of meaning. Danger, help, protect. The female looked at me with obvious distrust. But Gray vocalized again, more insistently, and she nodded. Then all three of them moved into the forest, disappearing like smoke. I didn't understand what was happening, but I didn't have time to figure it out. I pulled out my folding pruner and started harvesting as fast as I could, focusing on the plants with the most mature, resinous buds. I worked with a speed born of pure adrenaline, stuffing trimmed flowers into every pocket, every pouch, every available space in my pack. 20 minutes later, I heard them coming. Voices. Multiple people moving through the forest with tactical precision. The raid team. I had maybe 30 pounds of harvested bud in my pack and scattered around the site. Nowhere near enough time to police it all up. I was about to be caught red-handed. And then the forest came alive. The first agent stepped into the clearing and immediately triggered something I hadn't set. A massive log, suspended on ropes I'd never rigged, swung down from the canopy like a battering ram. The agent saw it at the last second and threw himself backward, and the log missed him by inches, smashing through the space where he'd been standing with enough force to pulverize bone. Shouting. Confusion. The raid team scattered. Then a second trap triggered on the opposite side of the clearing. Another swinging log, this one studded with broken branches that made it even more deadly. It caught a section of fishing net one agent was pushing through and ripped it from his hands. "What the hell kind of grower?" someone shouted, but the sentence was cut off by a sound that made my blood freeze. A roar. Not Gray's low vocalizations. This was something primal, territorial, absolutely massive in volume. It echoed off the valley walls, seeming to come from everywhere at once. The raid team froze. The roar came again, closer, followed by the sound of something huge crashing through the underbrush. Trees shook. Branches snapped. "Bear!" someone yelled. "Grizzly!" "There are no grizzlies in Washington," another voice countered. But they were already falling back, their formation broken by fear and confusion. That's when the rocks started. Stones the size of softballs came flying out of the forest from 3 different directions. They weren't random throws, they were targeted, precise, aimed at the ground near the agent's feet or at trees right above their heads. Warning shots. Intimidation. But they were thrown with such force that they left dents in tree trunks and cracked when they hit exposed stone. No human could throw like that. "Contact! Contact!" someone screamed into a radio. "We are under attack. Requesting immediate backup." More rocks. A larger one, maybe 20 pounds, sailed over the clearing and crashed through branches before slamming into the ground with an impact I felt through my boots. The female agent closest to me turned, and our eyes met for a split second. Her face was pale, her weapon raised but wavering. "Run," I said quietly. She ran. They all did. The entire raid team retreated in controlled chaos, falling back toward their staging area. The rock barrage followed them for the first 100 yards, then stopped abruptly. The forest went silent. I stood there in the clearing, surrounded by my ravaged crop, my pack stuffed with harvested buds, and the unmistakable evidence of sophisticated traps I absolutely had not built. Gray emerged from the tree line. Behind him, the female and the juvenile. They'd just driven off 13 armed federal agents. To protect me. To protect their medicine. To protect their family. "Thank you," I whispered. Gray nodded once. Then he gestured urgently. Leave. He was right. The DEA would be back with reinforcements, helicopters, maybe even military support if they thought they were dealing with some kind of militia group. I had minutes. July 19th, 2010. I grabbed what I could carry and ran. Not toward my vehicle. That would be the first place they'd set up a perimeter. Instead, I headed northwest, deeper into the wilderness, toward one of my emergency caches hidden 3 miles away near an abandoned logging road. Behind me, I could hear the chaos. Helicopter rotors thumping in the distance. Radio chatter echoing through the trees. The DEA wasn't just regrouping, they were calling in everything. I moved fast, using every bit of infantry training I had left from Iraq. Stay off trails. Use terrain to break line of sight. Move through water to kill scent trails in case they brought dogs. After 90 minutes of hard hiking, I reached the cache, a waterproof box buried under a rotted stump, marked with a small cairn only I would recognize. Inside, $5,000 in cash, a prepaid cell phone, a fake ID, car keys to a 10-year-old Honda Civic I'd bought for cash and parked at a trailhead 15 miles north. I was about to close the box when I heard movement behind me. I spun, hand going to my Glock. Gray stood there, 20 feet away, breathing hard. He'd followed me. In his massive hands, he carried something wrapped in deer hide. He approached slowly and held it out to me. I unwrapped it carefully. Inside, at least 5 pounds of the highest quality cannabis I'd ever seen, along with bundles of dried devil's club, ginseng, and other medicinal herbs. A fortune in natural medicine, given freely. Gray, I can't, I started. He pushed it toward me insistently. Then he touched his chest, then mine. For you. For helping us. I felt my throat tighten. I need to get some of this to Silver. Before I leave. He needs. Gray shook his head and made a gesture I'd learned meant already done. He pointed back toward the valley, then made his sleeping gesture. Silver had enough medicine. He would be comfortable. Will you be safe? I asked. They might come back. With more people. Gray looked at me for a long moment. Then he made a sweeping gesture that encompassed the entire forest, the mountains, the hidden places humans never reached. This was his home. He'd been evading humans for his entire life, just as his ancestors had for generations. They would disappear, become invisible again, like smoke in the wind. I'm sorry, I said. I brought them here. This is my fault. Gray reached out and touched my shoulder one last time. Not my fault, the gesture seemed to say. Just the world being what it is. Then he made a gesture I'd never seen before. He touched his chest, then mine, then interlaced his fingers. Connected. Always. And then he was gone, melting back into the forest like he'd never been there at all. I stood there for a long moment, clutching the deer hide bundle, feeling the weight of something that went far beyond medicine or money. Then I buried my old life in that waterproof box and started walking toward the future. July 20th, 2010. I followed the news from a motel room in Spokane, using the prepaid phone to access local news websites and police scanners. The story exploded. DEA raid repelled by unknown force in Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. Federal agents describe sophisticated traps. Possible militia involvement. Sasquatch sighting. Agents report massive creatures during failed raid. That last headline came from a tabloid, but it was based on real leaked reports. 3 agents had filed incident reports describing bipedal creatures of extreme size and non-human. Vocalizations. The DEA's official statement dismissed these as bears and stress-induced misidentification. But the trap discussion was serious. Forensic teams had examined the swinging log mechanisms and found something that baffled them. The ropes were made from twisted cedar bark and vine, not modern cordage. The trigger mechanisms used wooden pegs and natural fiber, not metal or hardware store materials. The construction was sophisticated but primitive, something out of a frontier-era survival manual, not a modern guerrilla grower's toolkit. The level of woodcraft required to build these traps is exceptional, one Forest Service expert told reporters. Whoever set them up has profound knowledge of traditional Native American techniques and wilderness survival. This wasn't your typical drug operation. One agent, speaking anonymously, told a reporter, "I've been doing this for 15 years. I've raided cartel grows with automatic weapons and booby traps." This was different. This was coordinated, intelligent, like the forest itself was defending that clearing. The investigation continued for weeks. They brought in additional teams, used thermal imaging from helicopters, deployed trail cameras throughout the valley. They found nothing. No suspects. No additional crops. No trace of whoever had built those traps. By August, the story faded from the news cycle. The DEA quietly closed the case, listing it as a successful operation that resulted in the destruction of 80 marijuana plants with an estimated street value of $240,000. No arrests. Suspects unknown. I was free. But I'd lost everything except what Gray had given me that last day. October 2010. I waited 3 months before I went back. 3 months to let the heat die down. 3 months to grow out my beard, lose 30 pounds, change my appearance completely. 3 months to grieve the life I'd lost and figure out what came next. I approached from a different direction entirely, hiking in from the north through terrain I'd never used before. It took me 2 full days of careful travel to reach the valley. The grow sites had been completely destroyed. The DEA had ripped out every plant, scattered the soil, and left fluorescent markers tied to trees, warnings to other potential growers that this location was compromised. But the Douglas fir where Gray and I had made our exchanges was untouched. I approached it slowly, reverently, and found what I was looking for, the flat rock where we'd left our offerings. On it sat a small bundle of dried cannabis, some of what I'd harvested during the raid, carefully preserved. And next to it, something that made my heart stop. A hand print, pressed into a piece of soft clay, then fired somehow, maybe in a ground pit, using techniques older than recorded history. The print was enormous, unmistakably non-human, and deliberately placed. A memorial. A message. A goodbye. I picked up the clay tablet with shaking hands and turned it over. On the back, scratched in with a sharp tool, was a symbol, a simple circle bisected by 2 lines. I had no idea what it meant in Sasquatch terms, but to me, it looked like what it was. Balance. Exchange. Reciprocity. The old ways of the world, before money and laws and borders. 2 beings, sharing a space, helping each other survive. I left my own offering there, the dog tags for my military service, the one thing I still carried that meant something. A piece of my old life, given to the forest, to Gray, to the memory of something important. Then I hiked to the hidden plateau where I'd met Silver. The shelter was gone. Not destroyed. Dismantled. The branches and cedar bark had been carefully removed, the moss bedding scattered, the entire site returned to something close to its natural state. Only the faintest traces remained, a few fire-darkened stones, some broken branches that didn't quite fit the pattern of the surrounding forest. They'd moved on. I found the burial site by accident, following a game trail up the ridge behind where the camp had been. It was in a small clearing surrounded by ancient cedars, where the afternoon sun broke through the canopy in golden shafts. The grave was marked with stones. Hundreds of them, carefully placed in a circular mound about 8 feet across. On top of the mound, they'd placed objects. Deer antlers, polished river stones, bundles of dried herbs tied with cedar bark. And in the center, a massive skull, bare, I thought at first, but the size was wrong. Something else. Something I didn't have a name for. Silver's grave. He'd passed. Sometime between July and October, the old one had finally let go. I stood there for a long time, listening to the wind move through the cedars, and let myself cry. For Silver, who I'd never really known but had tried to help. For Gray, who'd lost someone he loved. For the impossibility and beauty of what we'd shared. When I finally composed myself, I added my own stone to the mound. A piece of white quartz I'd carried in my pocket since Iraq, a good luck charm that had gotten me through 3 deployments. I hope it helped, I whispered to the grave. I hope you had some good days at the end. I hope it mattered. The wind picked up, and I swear I heard something in it. Not words. Not exactly. But something that felt like an answer. It mattered. I'm writing this from a legal cannabis farm in southern Oregon, where I work as a cultivation manager. Strange how things work out. What was a federal crime in 2010 is now my legitimate career. I help veterans like myself find employment in the industry. I donate a portion of profits to arthritis research and Native American health initiatives. The medicine I left in that forest 15 years ago is now available in dispensaries across the country. Edibles, tinctures, topicals, all designed to reduce pain and inflammation. What Gray knew instinctively, science has finally caught up with. I think about him often. About Silver. About that impossible summer when I learned that intelligence and compassion aren't uniquely human traits, and that sometimes the most profound relationships transcend language, species, and everything we think we know about the world. I've never seen another Sasquatch. I've gone back to that valley a dozen times over the years, always leaving small offerings at the Douglas fir, always hoping. But there's never been a response. The family moved on, or maybe they're just being more careful now, staying deeper in the wilderness where humans rarely go. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing. If the stress of running an illegal operation, the isolation, the constant paranoia, maybe it all created an elaborate delusion. Maybe Gray was just a particularly smart black bear and my mind filled in the rest. But then I look at the clay handprint I keep in a safe deposit box. I look at the photos I took of the grave site. I remember the intelligence in those eyes, the precision of those gestures, the unmistakable sense of person I felt when Gray touched my shoulder. It was real. They're real. And somewhere in the vast wilderness of the Pacific Northwest, I believe they're still out there. Still trading with each other, still using plants as medicine, still raising their young in the hidden places humans haven't destroyed yet. People ask me sometimes about that summer. The few friends who know the full story want to understand. Why did I risk everything? Why didn't I just cut my losses and run when I had the chance? The answer is the deal we made. Not the unspoken agreement about tribute and protection. That was just business, survival, mutual benefit. The real deal was deeper than that. It was the deal that says, if you know someone is suffering and you have the power to help, you help. Not because there's something in it for you. Not because it's profitable or legal or safe. But because suffering matters. Because pain matters. Because an old being dying in agony deserves comfort, regardless of what species they belong to. Gray understood that deal. He risked his family's safety to help me escape. He gave me medicine worth thousands of dollars not because I'd earned it, but because it was the right thing to do. That's the deal that transcends every law, every border, every difference between us. It's the deal that says we're all in this together, humans and non-humans, visible and hidden, known and unknown. It's the deal that makes us more than just clever apes fighting over territory. It's the deal that makes us human. Even when we're trading with Sasquatch. The clay hand print sits in my safe deposit box, along with a few other mementos from my old life. My dog tags are still in that forest, somewhere on Silver's grave, probably covered in moss and fallen needles by now. I like to think that if Gray is still alive, he remembers me. That maybe on quiet autumn evenings, he passes by that Douglas fir and thinks about the strange human who left medicine and received friendship in return. I like to think that the valley is still protected. That the family, or their descendants, still move through those ancient trees, invisible to hikers and rangers, living their lives according to rhythms older than human civilization. And I like to think that somewhere, in the vast library of Sasquatch knowledge passed down through generations, there's a story about a time when a human helped them. When the deal was kept. When two worlds touched, however briefly, and both were better for it. That's the deal we made. That's the deal that will shock you. Not because it involved crime or danger or mysterious creatures, but because it was so fundamentally decent. In a world that tells us to look out for ourselves, to trust no one, to fear what we don't understand, two beings from different worlds chose something better. They chose compassion. They chose reciprocity. They chose to see each other as people. That's not just shocking. That's revolutionary.